Okay, so as we're just saying, so we've determined that all of these are basically present in this connected relationship test. So all of these are present from 1 to 3. So then, in answering the question of value, then value would be based at open market value. So we spoke about this principle here as to why would this principle be here. We will try to elaborate to you why. So the buyer would not have been entitled to a full input tax deduction. Why would there be such a funny rule there? Okay, let's take a scenario and we're going to simplify things for the sake of trying to make a point a bit more clearer. Let's say there was a transaction that took place there was a transaction for, let's call this transaction 20,000 rands, right? And there was tax at the normal rate. We're going to simplify it, at 15% straight, just to strike the point. 15%. So 15% of 20,000 rands would give us 3,000 rands. So 3,000 rands from the seller's point of view. It's for space purpose. So from the seller's point of view, he would be leaving output VAT, if this is a normal transaction, of 300. And from the buyer's point of view, he'd be claiming input VAT of 300. So at this stage, everything is in balance, basically. There's no difference. He's claimed his input VAT, he's levied his output VAT. Right. So this would be a normal situation now. So let's take another scenario where the transaction is no longer now at 20,000 rands, but it occurs at 30,000 rands. So if we're to do 15% of VAT at 30,000 rands, I would imagine our VAT implication is 450, right? So the seller now, if these are still normal transactions, seller and a buyer over the side, so seller would still be levying VAT of how much? 450, whereas the buyer would be levying VAT input of 450 as well. 450, this is a net, right? Are we together? So in terms 4,500, sorry, 4,500. So the seller is banked how much? The seller is banked, in this instance, the seller banked the selling amount, which he sold for 20,000 rand for starters. So you will have banked 20k and he levied VAT for 3,000. So in his bank 20 and he levied VAT of 3k. So he was left with 17 which he banked, right? Whereas on this side, the buyer, he spent 20, right? And he was basically given relief for his input tax of 3k. Therefore, he spent 17k. Why? In this instance, seller, he banked, let's just use 30k, it's fine. 30k is what he receives. Profit is what he basically loses. So he's left with 25.5k in his bank. Whereas this side, this guy, he spent 30k, right? And you got the rate of input 4.5k, right? So he's basically spent 25.5k. These are in balance at this point, right? So as you can see, there is no difference. So whether this guy sold at any amount, the amount of input and output in this case would have been the same in terms of VAT input and VAT output. It would have been the same. So these people would have been in the same position. However, now let's take a situation where the seller and the buyer over here. So the buyer now makes 80% taxable supplies, whereas the seller, he makes 100% taxable supplies. Right. Okay. So the seller, let's take the first transaction of 20,000 rands. Okay. So you would have charged the VAT of 3,000 rands, which was the output to him, right? Output VAT of 30k. 300k, sorry. 3,000, sorry. 3,000. And now the buyer would have been in a situation where he basically would have spent 20k, right? And he would have claimed VAT of 80% on the actual 3,000 ones calculator. So 0.8 times 3,000 ones. So you will claim VAT here of 2,400 basically. Okay, so his net would have been that he would have spent 17,600. 17,600. Whereas this side it would have never really changed, it would have still been the 17k. Right. Now take the second scenario where we were transacting with, we were making a sale of 30,000 rands. So in this case, the seller receives 30k and he levies VAT of 4.5k, right? And whereas the buyer on this side, he spends 30k and he gets a relief of 3,600. Aha. So you see what the difference for SARS is. If you don't see it at this point, I don't know. You know, you really need to be asking yourself serious questions. But what are we saying? We're saying SARS in this position is better off because he's getting 1.1k as opposed to the transaction being netted off 0 extra. You know, it's an extra charge that you can recognize, extra VAT in that situation.